Every story of creation begins the same way. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, the gods shaped the world. In the beginning, there was nothing. But the Sumerian tablets do not begin there. They begin one step earlier. Before creation. Before the gods. Before anything that has a name in any tradition you know. The tablets describe what was there. They name it. And the name they give it is not a god. It is not a force. It is not void or darkness or chaos. It is a description of a state that the scribes recorded in the same administrative register they used for everything else in this archive. What existed before the gods was not mysterious to the people who wrote it down. It was procedural. And it is directly connected to everything this investigation has been building toward. The first three words of the Enuma Elish are Enuma Elish, when on high. Not in the beginning, not God created, not once there was nothing, when on high. The full opening runs, when on high the heavens had not yet been named, and below the earth had not yet been called by name. This construction is not poetic throat-clearing. It is a state description. The tablets are not saying that heaven and earth did not exist. They are saying that they had not yet been named. In the Mesopotamian administrative tradition that produced these texts, what does not have a name does not yet have a classification. It exists. It is simply outside the registration system. Not absent, unregistered. The text that opens with these three words is Enuma Elish Tablet 1. The principal copies in the British Museum were recovered from Nineveh, from the library of Ashurbanipal, and are dated to the Neo-Assyrian period around 650 BCE. The underlying tradition is considerably older, cited in texts from the early 2nd millennium BCE. It was not composed in the Neo-Assyrian period. It was copied there. This is not a myth about how the world emerged from nothing. It is a document describing the state of a system before its first registration procedures were executed. W.G. Lambert of the University of Birmingham spent 5 decades working on Babylonian literary texts. His Babylonian Creation Myths, published by Eisenbrauns in 2013, is the current standard critical edition of the Enuma Elish and related material. His analytical approach was consistently to treat the vocabulary on its own terms, rather than reading it through frameworks borrowed from later traditions. Thorkild Jacobsen appears in this investigation for the last time. His analysis in The Treasures of Darkness treated Apsu and Tiamat as concrete cosmic entities rather than symbolic forces. Apsu, the primordial freshwater beneath the earth. Tiamat, the salt water above it. Geographic rather than mythological. His reading was that the scribes were describing the literal hydrology of their world in its pre-organized state. Not chaos as a dramatic concept. The actual condition of the water table and the sea before the structures of civilization organized them. Jacobsen and Lambert both applied the same restraint. They did not import categories from Genesis or Greek cosmology. They asked what the text says on its own terms. That is the method applied here. 3 layers establish what the tablets say existed before the gods. The first is Apsu and Tiamat. The Enuma Elish opens with 2 entities that are not created, not born, not described as having any origin. They are simply present. Apsu, the primordial freshwater substratum beneath the earth. Tiamat, the salt water of the sea. The first line identifies them as the source of the gods, but it does not describe a creative act. It describes a condition. Their waters were mingling together. There, referring to gods who do not yet exist. Apsu and Tiamat precede the gods. They are the prior state from which the gods emerge, without intention on either side, without a decision being made. Neither commands the other, neither creates the other. They exist in proximity, and the interaction between their waters produces the subsequent states, not through will, through the properties of what they are. Her name has no settled Sumerian etymology. No identified Sumerian root explains it cleanly. This is the same pattern encountered in the 7th investigation with Aloros at the beginning of the king list, and in the 5th investigation with the name on the Babylonian world map that belonged to no classified language. The deepest accessible layer of the system, the layer below which no further layer is named, carries a name the tradition preserved without being able to derive. The third layer is the Abzu. The Abzu has appeared throughout this investigation as a destination. The Apkallu returned to it. The administrative termination of the previous epoch directed the prior beings back to it. Enki, in the 2nd investigation, does not create the Abzu. He moves into it and measures its dimensions, taking administrative possession of something already present. The Abzu as pre-administrative entity, something that exists before the system begins, that the system uses as its foundational reference point, and to which elements return when their assigned functions conclude. Not a creation, a given, a prior condition that the system was built on top of, rather than one that the system produced. Before Apsu, there was Nammu. Before Nammu, there is the unnamed state the Enuma Elish opens with. At every level going deeper, the structure is the same. A prior layer that the current layer emerged from, with no described origin for the layer below. The most significant observation this investigation has produced connects 3 acts from 3 separate texts. All 3 use the same root vocabulary. All 3 describe the same class of event at 3 different levels of the system. The first act is cosmological. The Enuma Elish describes the emergence of the first gods using the Akkadian verb balalu, to mix, to mingle, to combine 2 previously separate substances into a unified state. Their waters were mingled together. From the mingling of Apsu's fresh water and Tiamat's salt water, the first gods emerge. Lammu and Lahamu come into existence as products of the mixing event. Before the mixing, unnamed and unregistered waters. After the mixing, the first beings with names. The second act is biological. The creation of humans in the Atrahasis epic uses the same root. The procedure for creating the replacement workforce involves combining clay with the blood and flesh of Weila. The Akkadian descriptions of this combination use balalu, the same root as the cosmological mixing event. The word that describes the first creation of the gods is the same word used to describe the first creation of humans. The third act is eschatological. The transfer of Weila's etemu into humanity uses Akkadian vocabulary for binding and integration, terms whose semantic range overlaps substantially with balalu in the context of combining distinct substances into a unified state. The etemu does not remain separate from the human, it is integrated. The 2 components become one operational unit. Cosmological mixing, primordial waters combine, gods emerge. Biological mixing, clay and divine substance combine, humans emerge. Eschatological mixing, divine etemu and human substrate combine, the present state of humanity emerges. 3 acts, 3 levels, the same category of procedure. In a tradition that maintained precise vocabulary across centuries of copying, that used specific terms for specific actions and did not interchange them casually, using the same root for 3 events at 3 different scales of the system is not repetition. It is classification. The scribes are encoding a statement. These 3 events are instances of the same operation. If they are the same operation, the same question applies to all 3. Who designed the procedure? Who determined that mixing these specific components at each of these levels would produce the next state of the system? Before each mixing event, there is a state without names. Before the cosmological mixing, unnamed waters. Before the biological mixing, unformed clay. Before the eschatological mixing, unbound etemmu. The state before the mixing is the state before registration begins. It has a technical term in this archive. The Enuma Elish describes the state before creation with a specific Akkadian construction. La Shuma Zakru. Name had not been called. Not nothing existed, not there was chaos. Name had not been called. In the Mesopotamian administrative tradition, naming is a formal act with specific consequences. When Enki measures the dimensions of the Abzu in the second investigation, he is performing a naming operation, registering the Abzu's parameters into the system. When the gods emerge from the mixing of waters, the act that makes them real in the administrative sense is not their emergence, but their naming. Lammu is a name, a classification, a registration. What has no name is outside the system, not absent, outside the system. The system cannot process an unnamed entity because it has no identifier to reference. This logic runs beneath every major text this series has examined. The Tablet of Destinies is the document that assigns Shimatu, destiny, formal function. Before the tablet operates, the entries exist but are unassigned. The system is present but uninitialized. The Me, the set of foundational principles Enki distributed to civilization. Before distribution, present but not deployed. The procedures exist, they have not been activated. The Apkallu, named individually in the bit Mesari. Before commissioning, unnamed capacity. After naming, a registered function in the operational system. At every level, the prior state is the state before the naming procedure executes. After naming, the system processes the entry. Before naming, the entity exists and the system cannot yet work with it. This is what the Enuma Elish opens with. Apsu and Tiamat are present. The capacity for everything that follows is present, but no destiny has been assigned. Shimatu la Shimu. The naming procedure has not yet run. The Null State. 9 investigations, each one tracking the same administrative structure through different texts, different archives, different epochs. The Tablet of Destinies was received. The Me were distributed. The Apkallu were commissioned and returned. The prior administration was terminated. Kingship descended from heaven. Every single one of these events has a beginning, a moment before it happened. And at the beginning of every single one, the tablets use the same construction, a state that existed before the naming procedure began. Before the tablet was received, silence. Before the Me were distributed, unordered potential. Before the Apkallu were commissioned, unnamed specialists. Before creation itself, waters that had not yet been called by name. The tablets are describing the same category of prior state at every level of the system. And at the very top, before Apsu, before Tiamat, before Nammu, there is one more layer. The tablets name it. Once. In a single line that every translation renders as a poetic opening. It is not a poetic opening. It is a catalog entry. When George Smith of the British Museum published the first translation of the Enuma Elish in 1876, the framework was immediate and dominant. Here was the Babylonian equivalent of the Genesis creation account, a mythology performing the same cultural function as the biblical narrative. That framework has governed the study of the Enuma Elish for 150 years. Every element of the text is read in terms of its correspondence to Genesis. Apsu and Tiamat become the primordial chaos corresponding to the biblical Tehom. The killing of Tiamat becomes a divine victory over chaos corresponding to God's ordering of creation. The creation of humans becomes a degraded version of the image of God. When you read a document through its supposed correspondence to a later document, you stop reading the document itself. Benno Landsberger of the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago named this problem in 1926. His concept, Eigenbegrifflichkeit, the own conceptuality of Mesopotamian thought, was the argument that Sumerian and Akkadian categories have their own internal logic that does not map onto Greek or biblical frameworks. They should be read on their own terms. For 100 years, scholarship has cited Eigenbegrifflichkeit and not consistently applied it. Applied to the Enuma Elish without the Genesis overlay, a different document emerges. Not a Babylonian myth of divine combat. A state sequence record describing the initialization of a system. Each stage in the sequence has technical vocabulary that connects directly to the administrative, legal, and institutional documents of the same tradition. The vocabulary is not poetic, it is precise. The mythological reading has prevented that precision from being taken seriously for a century and a half.
In systems architecture, the term for the state of a program before initialization is the null state. The code exists, the data is stored, but no variable has been assigned a value, no process has been called, no function is running. The system is present, but not yet active. The null state is not the same as nothing. It is a defined condition with specific properties. The system in its null state retains all its capacity. It simply has not yet executed its first operation. The Enuma Elish opens with a description of the cosmic null state. Apsu and Tiamat are present. Their waters are present. The capacity for everything that follows is present. But no destiny has been assigned, no name has been called, no operation has run. The first operation is the mixing. The mixing of the waters initializes the system. The first gods emerge and are named. The null state ends. The scribes were not describing something that happened once in the mythological past. They were documenting a state that any system can enter and exit. The null state is the state before the first naming. The initialized state is what follows. The question the tablets leave open is, what exists in the null state before the naming that makes the subsequent initialization possible? Before Apsu mixed with Tiamat, Abzu existed. Before the mixing, the waters were separate. Something held them separate until the mixing became possible. Something allowed the mixing to occur. The tablets name that something. Not in the Enuma Elish, in a different text, an older one. The first line of Enuma Elish Tablet 1 contains a technical term that has not received its full analytical weight. When no gods whatever had been brought into being, uncalled by name, their destinies undetermined. Destinies undetermined. Shimatu la Shimu. This is the negative perfect of Shamu, to assign destiny, to formally establish what a thing will do in the system. Shamu is the operative verb of the Tablet of Destinies. The dupe Shimati, the Tablet of Destinies, is the document that performs the Shamu operation, the assignment of formal function to everything in the system. The Enuma Elish's opening says, before the tablet operated, Shimatu la Shimu, destinies had not yet been assigned. The state this investigation has tracked from its first episode, the Tablet of Destinies as the document that runs the first operation on the system, is identical to the state the Enuma Elish names as what existed before the gods. Before the tablet, the null state. After the tablet runs, the initialized system. Apsu, Tiamat, and the unnamed prior layer are the contents of the null state. The Tablet of Destinies is what transforms the null state into an operational one. This connects the first investigation in this series directly to the 11th. In the Sumerian liturgical tradition, There is a term, older than Enuma Elish, used specifically for the pre-naming state. A Sumerian term, preserved in a text from the Nippur tradition, classified in the British Museum collection under Liturgy of Uncertain Purpose. That term appears in exactly 2 other places in the surviving corpus, once in the Tablet of Destinies material, once in the Kur entry descriptions from the last investigation, the registry of states that exist outside the naming procedure. 3 documents, 1 term, 1 category. The state that existed before creation, the document that authorizes creation, the registry that exists outside creation. They are describing the same thing from 3 different positions in the system. What that thing is, what the scribes called the state before the first naming, and why the same word appears in the Tablet of Destinies and in Kur, requires one more text. That text has not been examined in this investigation. It will be. That is the next investigation.